Hey guys, today we're going to be doing an LS400 98 to 2000, so it's a 1UZ-FE VVT-i, and in this case it's an adapted original harness built to use a manual gearbox. So let's do this. Right, so as I said, it is a 1UZ-FE VVT-i, in this case from an LS400 98 to 2000. It's an existing harness that we have adapted. It is designed for a manual gearbox, so all the automatic gearbox wiring is gone, and obviously we fitted our ATMU or automatic transmission emulator device. Now, as I said, it's what I call a existing harness tape-up job. So basically we take the existing harness, we completely strip it down, clean everything out, repair everything that needs repairing, remove everything that's no longer necessary, and add in what we need to add in to make it a complete standalone harness. So first thing I'm going to do is we're going to cut some photos of that process so you can see exactly what's involved there. Then we'll come back and crack on what we need to get done today. So let's do that now. Right, so there you go. So now you know exactly what goes into it. As I said, completely strip it down, clean it off, repair what needs repairing. That's terminals, wires, everything, and remove everything that's unnecessary. So what are we doing today? First, we're going to go through the layout. So we're going to be going from the ECU end over there all the way along the harness, showing you exactly where everything is plugged in, showing you the changes that we've obviously added into the harness. And at the end, we'll go through the plugs that you need to connect inside your vehicle. So we'll give a detailed description of those. Once we've done that, then we're going to go into the testing phase, and that's going to be split into two sections. One with just the ignition on, testing a couple of things like lights and so on and so forth, and then we're going to move to actually starting the engine up, and there we will be testing a whole bunch of stuff as well. So let's start with the layout first, and we're going to start right here at the ECU end. So on our ECU, we've got 6 plugs in total, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, because it's a manual, only these 2 plugs are related to the engine harness now. These other 4 plugs, 1, 2, 3, 4, they now form part of their own harness, which pops out over here and goes into the fuse box over there. Okay, so these would always stay inside the vehicle. If you wanted to remove the engine harness, you've only got to unplug those 2, and obviously that one from the fuse box there, which brings me on to my next point, and that's going to be that breakout over there, which goes to a plug there. Now, do not stress about these plugs. All 6 of these plugs are unique, so you can't plug them into the wrong place. All of the fuse box plugs are unique, so you can't plug them into the wrong place. So do not stress about that at all. If it doesn't fit, it's in the wrong place. Right, so moving along from there, we then pop over to here and we have our grommet. So again, you want to drill into your firewall the correct size, and this will then pop in and keep the water out of your interior. Moving along from there, it then goes to the first of many of one of the plastics that keep everything together. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go straight over here towards the front. We'll pop back, and then we're going to make our way around there and go around there. So from here, you'll see this little section that pops up there. It goes over the top of the fuel pulsation damper, not regulator, and makes its way into the next piece of plastic. So this piece of plastic is just mounted with 2 bolts there and there. All right. Now, on this piece, you have 4 breakouts, 1, 2, 3, and then the bit that comes out the end to carry on with the rest of the harness. Now, the astute among you who have seen a 1UZ VVT-i harness will know that this coil plug usually comes out of here and makes its way over there. We've now changed that to have both of them come out there, which is actually similar to a 3UZ, so that's that you don't get confused as to which one goes where. Okay, so coming out of here, we've obviously got injector 7 and coil 7. Now, before I crack on, that's the right bank, that's the left bank, so it's always looking from the driver's perspective. And this is going to be cylinder 1, 3, 5, and 7. And that's going to be cylinder 2, 4, 6, and 8. So in case you need to know that information, obviously I'm going to go through each one what it is, but I just wanted to give you the overview at the beginning. So going back, yeah, we've got injector 7 and we've got coil 7 over there. Moving further along, we're going to have another 2 breakouts over here, and that's going to be injector 5 and coil 5. Moving to the front, we've then going to have the cam sensor for the left bank inlet cam, so that's what that's measuring. And then we've got injector 3 and coil 3. Now again, the student amongst you will notice there used to be a big old chunky diagnostic port on there. We've removed all of that because obviously we've put an OBD2 plug in there and the ability to read codes via the flashlight there, which we'll get to at the end of the testing phase. Right, so that's that section over there. Popping out the front here, we then just have our noise filter plug, so it'll plug into the little grey thing that'll be bolted, I think here, it's either here or here, and that plugs into there. What you'll notice is that there used to be a vacuum solenoid valve that ran to the front over here. Now that has been removed from the harness altogether, so that vacuum solenoid valve can be removed and you can just blank up the feed on the front over there. Okay. Moving along, it's going to come forward here and break out here, and it's going to go to injector 1 and coil 1, and lastly to oil control valve for the left bank. So again, all of these plugs are different. You can't get them in the wrong place, and they all break out together for this little section over here. The harness is then going to go about an inch forward before it breaks out at the next section, and that's going to be to our TPS. Now I know this doesn't look like a TPS for a Toyota, but what you'll notice at the back here is the harness goes along down into there, and you'll see the very familiar Toyota TPS on there. So what Toyota have done with the 1UZ-FE VVT-i is they've created a little sub harness, so you can plug in the TPS, so it's much easier to get access to rather than trying to get your fingers all the way down in there to unplug that plug over there. Also coming out of there is the accelerator position sensor. Now obviously you can see we have a cable over here, but this is actually an accelerator position sensor. For the most part, it does not have any connection to the throttle blade at all. So if you listen very closely, you can see no throttle blade moving at all. If I go to the very end, you can see the last little section is connected to the throttle blade, and that acts as a fail-safe because this was Toyota's pretty much one of their first drive-by-wire systems. So they wanted to have the ability, if the throttle did shut down for whatever reason, you could still put your foot flat to the floor and the throttle would open a tiny percentage and you could get home effectively. All right, following the harness down underneath there, it's going to pop over there and break out here, and it's going to go to your drive-by-wire motor plug. So that's the front one over there. It's then going to go to your front cam sensor. So bear in mind, the 1 and 3UZ VVT-is actually have 3 cam sensors. You have one on each inlet cam to measure the angle of rotation of the VVT-i on the inlet cams, and you have this one to obviously synchronize the engine position for the ECU. The harness then carries on along there, and you've got a mounting point there and there. These are not the original clips. These are ones that I found that fit the purpose for me. And we come down to here, and then it's going to break out here into 2 sections. One is going to carry on down there, down through there, and go to your crank sensor. So really nice and simple. Normally your aircon pump would be here. So you can get this down with the aircon pump in. It's not impossible. It's just obviously a lot more difficult with it in to do so. Then the next breakout is going to be your oil pressure switch. Now obviously I'm not pulling this through this hole over here because this is actually an LS430 engine, not an LS400 engine, and therefore the oil filter housing looks like this. On your LS400, the oil filter housing would be about here, and the switch is actually facing backwards. So that's why it breaks up at the top here, so it can come down. You can actually bring it through here and then through here and plug in the switch, or you can break it out there, go over the top, round your aircon pump and plug in over there. Okay, right, so that is that side now. So we're going to pop back over to the plastic at the back there, and let's start going through there. So this big piece at the back has 3 mounting points, and I'm going to show you those now. So we've got that one over there where my finger is there, and that's one I do actually have a bolt hole for. So remember, like I said, this is the LS430 engine, so it has different mounting points from the LS400. You then have another mounting point down there. So on your 1UZ-FE VVT-i engine, you'll have ability to screw that down over there. And lastly, we've got another bolt all over here. So again, that would then keep this plastic nice and upright and in place. All right. Coming out of here, as I said, used to be the automatic gearbox, no longer the case. So what we've basically got now is we've got our earthing point, which is going to go into the M8 hole, not the M6 up there. You shouldn't have a bolt hole there. This is for the 3UZs. They use the smaller hole up there. You guys are the 1UZ-FE VVT-i, you use the M8 hole over there. Also coming out of there, we then have our lambda sensor for our main O2 sensor for the left bank, and that is then plugging in over there. Now, do bear in mind, guys, there is a metal shield that goes and bolts to the block over here where all these bolt holes are, and that then keeps the plug and everything protected from the heat of the exhaust. So please, guys, please make sure that you do put that heat shield back in. Otherwise, that plug is not going to last very long at all when it's basically faced directly with the heat of the exhaust. Okay. Right, so moving along there, and you'll see here we've got our next plug, and that is going to underneath the intake. Now that does form part of an entire harness, which you probably saw in the photos of the build process. and that goes under the intake. I'm going to cut to a photo now, and I'm going to show you. As you can see, that little white frame bolts to the starter motor, then has the starter motor solenoid plug coming out, and then it breaks off and goes to the 2 knock sensors. You'll see in this case, we've remade the knock sensor harness because the wires were a bit brittle, and so therefore it's all nicely heat shrinked with labels on so you guys can get it perfectly fine. So now we're getting back to here. Remember, knock 1 is bank 1, which has cylinder 1 on it, and knock 2 is bank 2, has cylinder 2 in it. So this is K&K1, that is K&K2. So remember, you'll see from the photo where the 2 knock sensors are. All right. Not only that, you then have your main starter cable. So that's really long in this case, because remember on the 1UZ VVT-i, it came down along the block at the bottom because the battery was situated here. Okay. So you guys feel free to obviously chop this to the correct length to suit your application, and obviously run it in a way that's going to suit you guys. Okay. So that's that whole section over there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop around the other side, and then we're going to start looking at all of those connectors over there. Okay. So moving further along here, you'll see we've got our next section that breaks out and goes to our second earth on the back of the cylinder head here. So again, we're using the M8 holes, not the M6 holes slightly above, but you shouldn't have a bolt in there anyway because of 1UZ VVT-i. So that's going to bolt in directly there. Moving along here, then we're going to get to the end of the plastic, and we're going to start moving along the rest of the harness. The first things that pop out here is going to be Injector 8 and Coil 8. Moving slightly further along, we're then going to break out there, and we're going to go to the ACIS vacuum solenoid plug, which goes in here. So again, that actually goes underneath the intake and bolts to the vacuum solenoid valve. Then we're going to have Injector 6 and Coil 6 coming out there. Moving along, and you'll see there is bolt holes there, so you can use P-clamps or whatever to hold the harness in place there nice and neatly. But moving along to there, and you'll see we break out for 3 sections this time. We have the cam sensor for the right bank, again measuring the inlet cam there. We then have Injector 4 and Coil 4. Moving along to the last section over here, and that's going to break out there, and it's going to go to Injector 2, as you can see over there. Coil 2, as you can see there, the oil control valve, which plugs in there. We then have the coolant temperature sensor for the ECU. That's the 2-wire one that goes in there. Now, when you guys look at your engine, you're not going to have a coolant temperature sensor there. You're going to have a blanking bolt, but that can be removed to fit a coolant temperature sensor of your liking. And what we have done for you guys is we've actually put a loose wire in here. There's no termination or anything on there, so you guys can terminate it to whatever's required for whatever coolant temperature sensor you might need. When we get over to going through the plugs on the connector side, I'll show you exactly where that one comes out. Okay. Also coming out here, we then have the MAF sensor, or mass airflow sensor plug. So remember guys, with the 1UZ VVT-i LS400, so let's make that clear, that has this really big style mass airflow sensor. Looks like a bullet, as you can see inside there. If you guys are interested in these housings, these actually come from Calvin Glover from Cartoon NZ. We do keep 2 or 3 of them in stock here ready for you guys that want to purchase. So if you do want one, let me know, and obviously we can provide them to you as well. Right, then coming down along here, it's going to pop down to here, and then it's going to break out. And as you can see, we've added in our section there to go to the alternator plug. So that's going to plug directly into your 1UZ alternator. Now, as you can see, this is a 3UZ alternator. So any of the 5-speed 3UZ alternators will work as well if you guys are struggling to find a replacement, if you need a replacement. Moving along down to there, and then we have our last lambda sensor. So remember, we're only using the lambda sensors from the main exhaust manifolds. We're not using the secondary ones, and I will explain that in more detail in the diagnostics section of the other testing. Right, so that's pretty much the entire layout of the harness. It is very simple. It just makes a U shape. Pretty much everything goes, and all the sections split up in their different sizes, so you shouldn't really be able to even get the plug in the wrong place. But hopefully the video helps you to see exactly what you need to do when you get the harness back on your side. Okay, so now we're going to move over to the plugs at the fuse box. Like I said, there is only 2 plugs, and in actual fact, the 6-pin one is only for the OBD2 plug. Okay, so there's nothing for you to connect there. That's just to allow you to do OBD2. So if you don't need to do it, you can actually remove the plug and put it in your glove box or whatever you want to do. That's the only reason that it's there. Moving on to our 9-pin plug, and if you've watched all our other videos, this is exactly the same plug that we put on pretty much every harness, so we made a nice standardized system. So let's start from the beginning. So number 1 is going to be a red 14 gauge wire, and that is our permanent 12 volt supply. Now, I can't stress enough when I say permanent 12 volts, I do mean permanent 12 volts. Do not connect it to an ignition 12 volts because the ECU retains memory of all the diagnostic codes. It does long-term fuel trim learning and all of that stuff. So if you do not connect that red wire to a permanent 12 volt source, what's going to end up happening is every time you turn the key off, if you connect it to ignition source, you're going to reset the ECU. So it's going to undo all the long-term fuel trims. You're going to wipe all of the diagnostic codes from the ECU, which is going to make diagnosing a fault incredibly difficult, almost impossible. So again, I can't emphasize enough, red, permanent 12 volt source, not an ignition 12 volt source. Next up is going to be number 2, and that is black with a yellow tracer there, and that is going to be your start signal. Now that does require a 12 volts, and the reason we've done that, most of the time you guys are using key barrels or ignition barrels to get your signals from, and that's what they would be giving out, a 12 volt signal on the start signal. So really nice and simple. If you're using a push button start, just remember other side of the button, ignition 12 volts, other side of the button, our black with a yellow wire. Next up is number 3, which is yellow with a green, and that's where that temperature wire that I showed you earlier comes out. So again, if you need to fit a temperature gauge that'll work with your specific vehicle, you can just connect it to that, and then you've got the yellow with the green wire out there that you can then run directly to your gauge. Next up, number 4 is going to be gray, and it's a 16 gauge wire that we've got there, and that is for your fuel pump. Okay, so the ECU is controlling the fuel pump. One of the relays in here is for the fuel pump, and that should be perfectly sufficient for a single fuel pump. If, however, you feel that you need to use bigger fuel pumps for whatever reason, you can then use that, which will output a 12 volts, and you can use that to trigger a relay closer to the tank with a bigger power supply if that is required. Otherwise, you can connect that one literally directly to the 12 volts of your fuel pump. Moving on to number 5, that is going to be the yellow with the red you see over here, and that is the check engine light. So we do supply you with the wire for your check engine light on your dash. We also put an LED inside the fuse box that acts as a check engine light as well. Okay, so you do have that available. Now the signal coming out is a ground, which we do explain in the welcome pack for you guys. But yeah, so it's a ground signal coming out. So whatever you're using, whether you're fitting an LED, the other side needs 12 volts, that is a ground. Moving on to number 6, which is the yellow wire. So it's a straight solid yellow wire, and that is your tacho signal or your rev counter signal. So in this case, the ECU is outputting the signal. It is a 4-cylinder signal that it is putting out. Okay, so if you have something that a dash that requires a 6-cylinder signal, you'll need a conditioner of some sort. We do sell conditioners, so we can alter, you know, the way. If you've seen our 1UZ to IS200 plug and play harnesses, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a little tiny box that can convert a 4-cylinder RPM to a 6-cylinder or whatever you require. Next up is number 7, and that's going to be your black with a red tracer. Now this is the ignition one. So this is the one you are going to connect to your ignition 12 volts. This one is turning everything on in the fuse box over here. It's supplying power to the ECU and everything else that is required. Now obviously these are just small wires, as you can see here, so these are not powering things directly. These are just turning things on, so that's why they can be as small as 20-22 gauge. They're not really taking any sort of electrical load at all. Okay, right, so that's going to be the ignition. Oh, sorry, before I complete, if you're using a key barrel to get your ignition 12 volts, just remember that key barrels have an accessory 12 volts and ignition 12 volts. Super important you get the correct one, because your accessory 12 volts cuts out when you move the key to the start position. If you do that, then basically the whole system is going to shut down every time you move the key to the start position, and obviously the engine's not going to start. But unfortunately the engine will still turn over, so it's just going to drive you nuts. So please make sure, and it happens more than you think, just make sure that when you're looking for the 12 volts from your key barrel, if you find it, move the key to the start position and make sure that 12 volts stays. If the 12 volts goes away, you've got the accessory feed, not the ignition feed. All right. Next up is number 8, and that's going to be pink with the blue, which I've got connected to my device here because we're using it to make the dash work. So that is your charge light, alternator light, battery light, whatever you guys call it. It goes under many names. That is a ground signal from the alternator directly to there, which you can then use for your dash. Now, little tip, on the original vehicles, obviously inside the dashes themselves, they had sort of diodes so you wouldn't backfeed through that. Now, if you have an older vehicle, and this is mostly older vehicles I come across it, that have either incandescent bulbs or specifically have the ability to backfeed through the cluster. If that is the case, a couple of options are open to you. Number 1, switch the bulb out for an LED. Problem solved. Okay, obviously an LED is a diode. There you go. If you can't get LED bulbs for your cluster, then obviously just fit an actual diode in line between our pink and blue wire and your cluster to not allow any backfeed through the cluster. Now, if that is the case, I have seen it actually keep the system alive, where the dash was basically feeding all the way back into the fuse box. Okay. Number 9 is going to be yellow with the black, and that is the oil pressure switch. So that is linked up to the oil pressure switch that we see here. And again, in this case, it's going to my little device, which I'm going to use to convert to make the oil lights appear on our dash over there to make sure that that is working correctly. And as I said, the 6-pin plug is nothing other than your OBD2 connection. So there's nothing to do there at all. You don't even have to have it plugged in. You can keep it to the side if you want and only plug it in when you need to do OBD2 diagnostics. Okay. Right. So that's the layout. That's the plug. Hopefully really nice and super easy. Like I said, you will get this. We email it to you with every single harness, so you do have a hard copy of that, and we keep everything on file for every single harness that we build. So you can contact me 4 years down the line and I can pull up all of the paperwork that you need for your particular harness. Right, so now that that's done, what I'm going to do is get this thing up and running, get it all tested, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do those 2 testing procedures. So I'll see you in a minute. Right guys, so now we're going to move on to the testing of the harness, and as I said earlier, it's going to be broken up into 2 sections, one with just the ignition on and one with the engine actually running. So first thing we're going to do, let's go through all the tests that we are going to carry out, then we'll jump into the test with just the ignition on. So what are we going to be testing first? So with the ignition on, we're going to test if the immobilizer has been removed. So what I've done is I've connected the security light to our cluster over there, and you can see I've got my security light flashing. So as soon as I give the system ignition power, that security light will stop flashing, indicating that the immobilizer has been removed, because obviously we removed the immobilizer inside the ECU. Also, when I put the ignition on, we're going to be checking for the check engine lights. That's going to appear in the top corner there, and the LED is going to appear in the fuse box, making sure that both of those systems are working. Also, we're going to be looking for the battery light and the low oil pressure light, so those 2 should appear in the corner there as well. Once we've done that, we're going to move over to our OBD2 diagnostic machine. We're going to make sure that it communicates via the OBD2 plug we've put into the engine harness, and make sure that it's picking up that it is an LS400 on the system over there. Once we've done that, then we're going to test the fuel pump relay. So obviously the fuel pump is controlled by the ECU. What I'm going to do, if I haven't already, I'm going to put a link up in the top there, and it's going to be a video that I've done which explains in great detail how the fuel pump systems work when they are controlled by the ECU for a Toyota and a Lexus vehicle, or specifically in the ranges that I discussed there. So I do appreciate if you guys can go watch that, because sometimes it answers some questions that you might have when you come to fit the harness. Once we've done that, that is the entire section with the ignition on. Then we're going to move over to actually starting the engine. Now what we're going to be testing then is the first thing is the starter circuits. We want to make sure that when I touch the black with the yellow tracer wire to 12 volts, that obviously the engine cranks over and starts up. So we know the starter circuit is completely intact and working. Next up after that, we're going to test the ACIS system. So what we're looking for basically is this valve to move into the closed position. Now, again, for the ACIS system, I have a very detailed video which incorporates taking an entire intake manifold apart to even show you what it looks like inside here, how the system works, and obviously why it's so important that it is working. If it's not, you lose a load of low down torque. So I'll put that video up so you guys can then go and watch that. Okay. Once we've done that, then we're going to move over to our throttle over here, and we are literally just going to rev the engine. So as discussed, it's a drive-by-wire. So if I just rev a little bit like that and the engine revs up, we know it is working 100%. Once we've done that, we're going to come back to the OBD2 machine, and we're going to test the 2 oil control valves, which are these over here. There's one on each inlet cam, and that is then going to retard and advance the cam. It's going to make the engine sound lumpy, and we do one bank at a time, and that is going to then tell me that everything is working with those oil control valves. Once we've done that, I'm going to move and I'm going to pull out each injector one by one so we can hear the engine misfiring, so that we know that each and every cylinder is firing as it should be, and we know therefore that everything is working there correctly. Once you've done that, we'll move back over and we'll start looking at the tacho on the cluster there, making sure we are actually getting a signal through, bearing in mind that obviously this is a IS200 cluster, so it's looking for a 6-cylinder signal. This will be giving out a 4-cylinder signal. I've taken it directly to the cluster, so it will actually be not correct, but we are mainly just testing that there is a signal coming through there. Then we're going to go over to the coolant temp. So as I said, I have connected my wire to there from the temp wire that's on there, and I've made a temporary connection. So what we're looking for is the coolant temperature to obviously register something. And because the engine's been running for a little while, by the time we carry all the tests, we should see it rise up to make sure it is working. Once we've done that, then I'm going to go and explain the diagnostics. So how they work, what you need to do, what you can do with them. All right. So let's jump into testing with just the ignition on, and as I said, the first one is immobilizer removal. So I'm going to provide the system with 12 volts on the ignition 12 volts wire, and you're going to see that security light go off as the system powers up. So as I do that now, there you go, you can see the security light has gone off, so that means the immobilizer is removed, and obviously when we start the engine, that'll confirm that as well. As I said earlier, we're going to check for our check engine light, so we can see it in the top corner there, and we can see our LED lit up on the fuse box. We can also see the battery light over there, and we can also see the low oil pressure light over there as well. So once the engine starts, we'll obviously be looking at this for the tacho and the coolant temp, and we'll make sure all those lights turn off and that everything is working as we expect it to. Now that that's done, what we're going to do is move over to our OBD2 machine over here, and we're going to start doing the test for that fuel pump. But first, let's make sure that it is actually communicating and picking up that it is an LS400. Now the system takes absolutely ages to load, so I've already done that for you guys. And you can see there that it's picking up that it is an LS400. And what we'll do now is we'll move over to that. So all we're going to do is an active test, and we're just going to test the fuel pump. Now, if you look here, it says fuel pump, relay, and fuel pump. You'll know exactly why that is if you watch that video. So if you haven't, do yourself a favor and watch that video, and it'll explain all of that in detail. So let's just do this. So you can hear the relay clicking, and you can hopefully hear that fuel pump working. And there you heard it turn off. Okay, right, so that is obviously all of the test with the ignition on. It is nice and short and sweet, but everything is working as it should. So what we're going to do now is we are going to take a break. I'm going to let it run up for a little bit just so I can get some coolant temperature in there, and then obviously we'll pop back just so we can see the coolant temperature actually rise as I'm running it. So bear with me a second and I will be back. Right guys, so we're back for the testing with the engine running. As you can see, I've let it run for a minute so that we can actually get some coolant temperature in there. So you can see there, I've got some coolant temp over there, which is fantastic. So quick recap, starter circuit, just make sure it starts. ACIS, we want to make sure that that valve closes over there. Drive-by-wire test, I'm just going to rev the engine by the throttle there where your accelerator cable is connected. Oil control valve test, that's going to be on the machine over there. Injectors and coils, I'm going to go and unplug each injector one by one. Tacho, we're going to go back and look at the tacho signal to make sure that's coming through and all the lights turn off, obviously. Coolant temp, which you've already seen, but hopefully we'll see it actually rise up as we run the engine, and then we'll come back and do the diagnostics. So first thing I need to do, get my ear defenders on, and let's get this thing started. So as I said, I'm just going to take the black with the yellow tracer wire, and we're going to connect it to 12 volts. So 3, 2, 1. Pull that ignition wire off. We're going to put it back on again. Okay, so let's get into the diagnostics now. So because it's a VVT-i 1UZ, you have OBD2. So that is the most beneficial way of doing any types of diagnostics, obviously, because it gives you the most amount of data to be able to diagnose a particular issue. All right. We've done the plug for that, which, as I said, this 6-pin plug is solely for that. So you could actually take this out, keep it in your glove box, and only when you need to do diagnostics, you could plug that plug in, technically speaking. But you can also just leave it in there, no problems at all. Okay, so as you said, this is a manual setup. So we have fitted our Atomy device, which gets rid of all the codes that are relevant to make the ECU run correctly without the automatic gearbox. But there are still 3 codes that remain behind. Again, because they don't affect the performance, so we leave them there, and they do not cause a check engine light. So as you can clearly see, there's no check engine light while this engine is running. All right, so the only time a check engine light will come on is if it's a code that's serious that needs to be rectified. So that's why we are happy for you to connect up the check engine light on your harness. Absolutely no problems whatsoever. Right, so first of all, let's go through the codes that you should see, and we're going to go through that on the machine now, so we can go into diagnostic trouble codes. And there's going to be 5 codes in total. Okay, the first 2 is bank 1 sensor 2 and bank 2 sensor 2. Again, these don't affect performance. As you can clearly see, they don't cause a check engine light to come on, so we just leave them there. They don't do anything to it, they don't affect it in any way. Then I said we've got the 3 codes, which is 1755, 1760 and 1765. So those are P codes, by the way, if you've got another machine instead of one of these. And that is the SLU, SLT and SLN circuits. Those are solenoids as part of the gearbox. They can be removed via resistors, but we don't see the point of adding extra expense to the harness by fitting resistors that effectively do absolutely nothing. They don't cause a check engine light to come on, so there's no point in removing them and adding more complexity and expense for no reason. So those are the 5 codes that you should have at all times. Okay, so don't worry about those. When you're doing diagnostics, if you've got those codes, they're perfectly normal. It's what you're looking for is anything other than those particular codes. All right, so what happens if you don't have a diagnostic machine or an OBD2 machine? Again, it's absolutely no problem at all. What we have done in our harnesses and in our fuse box is we fitted the ability to read codes with just bridging a particular spot on our fuse box here. So really, really nice and simple. It uses the old flash code system. So like Morse code, and the check engine light would flash and it gives you codes. Now then, word of warning, works on JDM ECUs, works on European ECUs, unfortunately does not work on US ECUs. You guys are stuck solely with OBD2. You have to use an OBD2 machine to connect it. And obviously you guys had the unfortunate value of the fact that the secondary oxygen sensors would cause a check engine light and so on and so forth. Whereas we don't have to worry about those issues with JDM and European ECUs. Right. So what do I mean by bridging something in the fuse box? So again, you'll get a fuse box diagram with your harness, so don't stress about that. It's called TC or trouble codes. So that's the one you're looking for. But if you look in the fuse box here, you'll see right there where my fingernail is, it looks like there should be a fuse in there, but there's not. And that is perfectly normal. That is exactly what we did it for. So all we're going to do now is take the 5 amp fuse there. Now remember, I'm just using a fuse because obviously it's right next to it and you've got everything in your fuse box there. You can use a paper clip or a piece of wire or whatever you want to. Basically, all you want to do is bridge these 2 terminals. And as I do that, you'll notice straight away the check engine light goes off and it's going to start flashing codes. So you're going to have 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's bank 1 sensor 2. Then you're going to have 1, 2, and you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 29. That's bank 2 sensor 2. So those are your 2 codes. So you put them together, you get 2 and 7, 2 and 9, 27, 29. You'll notice there's a long pause there and you'll see it's going to do 7 again. So you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. There's your 7. Okay, so as you'll see, what basically happens is if you just keep it bridged, it's going to just keep cycling through the code. So it's going to go 2, 7, 2, 9, long pause, 2, 7, 2, 9. Right, I do have a video about doing diagnostics. I did it on a non-VVT-i. It's exactly the same process because non-VVT-i doesn't have OBD2, so you kind of have to use only that one. But I'll put a link up there in that video as well, so you can go have a look through there. Gives you a couple of bits of information about diagnostics and do's and don'ts, etc., etc. So it could be useful information for you guys on there. Okay, so you can do diagnostics via the fuse box without any machine at all, so that is a bonus. If you have a machine, it is incredibly useful, and I'm not going to understate the fact of an OBD2 diagnostic scan tool to be able to do a lot more stuff. So you can look at live data, coolant temperature, engine RPM, etc., etc. It's just the amount of data is plenty enough to diagnose any issues that you may be suffering from. All right. So remember that your check engine light, if it comes on, it is because there is a genuine fault that needs resolving, exactly like you would on any normal modern vehicle. So again, you can check those codes via there, and we do actually give a code list in our welcome pack for the customers, so you guys will have access to all of those codes and you know exactly what the codes are, what the problem is, and we give some advice on how to rectify that. Okay. There is one other important thing about bridging that thing that you need to be aware of. When you do that, you put the ECU into diagnostics mode. Now, one part of that is obviously the check engine light flashing the codes. That's brilliant, fantastic. You can see exactly what the fault is. The other thing it does is it actually locks the timing at 10 degrees. All right. Why is that? Well, it's a really nice, quick, easy way to check your timing on your engine without having to pull any of your covers off. You literally grab yourself a timing light, you put the lead around cylinder 1 coil wiring over there. Now remember, some timing lights do work just being wrapped around the wires. Mine does, a CD one. I'm not saying everyone does. If you don't, then you normally would take the coil out, get an old actual sort of some HT lead, spark lead. I've heard them called bogey cords before. It doesn't really matter what you call it. Basically, you get the ones like you do on a non-VVT-i and you put it between this coil and the spark plug, and then you wrap your timing light lead around that. Then if you come down here, you'll see we've got 0, 5, 10, and 15 degrees. So you can check your timing, and it should be dead spot on at 10 degrees. Now what I normally do, and hopefully I can, you can just about see it in there, hopefully. Let me see if I come around here, if you can get a better view. No, well, you can sort of see it there, just in the corner there, where my finger is there. I normally take some white paint, Tip-X correction fluid, whatever you call it, and I normally just color those in so they're very visible in a light so you can see them. So what you can basically do is you can hook your timing light up, bridge those two terminals there, and you can check your timing, and it should be locked at 10 degrees. If it's not at 10 degrees, then you can start looking at the actual mechanical timing and make sure it's okay. Bearing in mind, obviously, these pulleys are rubber damped, so they can also break the seal over there, so you might not necessarily be out of timing, but this is a good time to check and see if that is the case. You can obviously pull these pulleys off when you're doing a timing belt, and you can physically check the timing against the case behind there where the timing belt actually runs. Okay. Right, so the reason I mention that is because I've had some times in the past where guys will just take that, because they haven't connected the check engine light in their car, they just take that, they read some codes, they forget about it, they close the fuse box lid, they basically go and start the car and effectively drive off. Obviously that is not good, because you're locking the timing at 10 degrees, you're going to have no power. Okay, so please make sure that if you are doing diagnostics and you are bridging those terminals, that you do take out whatever you use to bridge it, whether it be the fuse, whether it be a paper clip, whether it be a piece of wire, just take it out when you're finished. Do not leave it in there at all. Okay, so hopefully that's been super helpful. So overlaps with the diagnostic codes, OBD2 machine, the best way to do it. In a pinch, you can then bridge those terminals and get the codes, and obviously we provide you with a code sheet which you can either laminate, stick in your car, or we email them to you, so you can just have your phone on you at all times and you can access them wherever you want. Just remember, bridging the codes, do not leave the terminal in there, otherwise you're going to lock the timing at 10 degrees. Okay, so all done and dusted. Everything works exactly as we want it to. Super happy with it. So what we need to do now, get this off, get it off to the customer so he can fit it in his vehicle and get his car running. If you guys have any questions about these setups, please let us know down below. You can comment anything you have. And as I always say, if there's anything you'd like to know or you'd like us to do a video on to explain a certain thing, please feel free to ask. Next time we get something in the workshop that will allow me to do a video to do an explanation, more than happy to do so for you guys. Okay, so thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon, guys. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life. I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, put your hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light. Ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel?